Fausty Witches.
Yo.
So today we have a celebrity guest. Him off the news. Chris.
Oh.
I saw you on the telly box on BBC News. Are you willing to talk about that?
Why would we talk about that? It's got nothing to do with witchcraft.
You're famous, Chris. You're famous. Does that mean that technically you are now a TV personality?
Yeah. Lol.
Well, you were on the television.
I was on the television.
And it was on prime time BBC. This went like fucking Living TV or some shit like that. Now, are we just going to breeze over the subject?
We're breezing over the subject because I don't think it's important. But yes, I was on the television on Sunday.
It was on the television. Next time you piss me off, I might just post it in every single group I'm a part of.
Why would you do that
Until the time I forget about it. But yes, Chris, I think now you are a celebrity witch, and having been on the actual television.
Wow, the bar is low.
The bar is fairly low. You're right. Yeah, you are right about that. So today, the title / topic / is Wandless Magic, and I was trying to be quirky and smart, insinuating that you don't need the magical tools that you see in order to do a magic. So, do you need magical looking tools like cauldrons and wands and that in order to do magic and witchcraft and that? Can you clear that up for us?
No.
Right, you don't.
No, you don't need them. So it's one of those things that you often describe them as, at least in the early days of the podcast and stuff, as training wheels.
Yes, they are training wheels a lot of the time.
So, which I think is a good analogy. I think for those that are wondering what we mean by you don't need them, it comes down to comfortability, like it does with training wheels. You know, it makes the whole process a little bit easier when you're starting off. I personally couldn't imagine using them anymore myself. If anything, they would complicate the matter rather than make things easier. I think that's where you get to a certain level of practice where you just kind of go, these are no longer part of my practice. It's a nuisance to use some of those things. I must say I've never used a wand. I don't think I've ever.
One of those selenite ones that you stick where the sun don't shine.
No, you should be careful doing that, Liam. They dissolve.
They do dissolve, yes. I don't know that for a fact, but I hear that they dissolve when you put them in certain places. And the more excited you are, the quicker they dissolve.
Oh, okay. Wow. You really have lowered the bar today.
I would like to say something, right? I would like to say that this kind of stabilizers on a bike, training wheels type thing, when I'm talking about magical tools being stabilizers on a bike, and that the kind of idea of the stabilizers on a bike is that, yeah, they keep, when you're learning to ride your bike, stop you from falling over, but eventually you get rid of them, you take them off, yeah? I'm only equating that to magical tools. I'm not necessarily equating it to things and technologies that make your life easier from mundane things. So I'm not saying like you can't use a cauldron for potion making.
Yeah, because you need a vessel.
Yeah, because of the vessel, because that's kind of the point, or a pestle and mortar. But I'm also one of those people that would say, well, do I use a cauldron for potion making? No, I tend not to. I tend to use modern implements for potion making. And I think, because I've been told by enough university professors now, that the last witch died in the 1900s, the last cunning man and woman died in the 1900s, and that there are no more witches, there are no more cunning people, and that all of this thing of witchcraft and the tools of witchcraft, we get them because they're kind of iconic for a time and place back when witches existed. That's not true. I have a cauldron and I do occasionally use one, not for potion making. I normally use it for, well, actually, if I'm perfectly honest with you, and I am being honest now, this cauldron has in it stuff which I use it as a bin. Okay, it is actually a bin. I put stuff in the bin that's biodegradable, and then I tend to set fire to it, and that builds the foundation of, if I'm doing work with fire, I'll just throw that on the bottom and use it as the kindling. There's bits of cloth in there for making and cutting up rags and poppets and all sorts. There's paper, there's little snapped off bits of wood, all sorts of stuff goes in there. If it catches fire, it goes in the cauldron, and I just use that as a foundation. I don't use it for brewing. There's been this thing, this, I don't know whether it is a thing, you'll have to tell me this, it might be a Scott Cunningham thing or something, that there's the white witch and the black witch, the good witch and the bad witch, and there's good magic and bad magic, and the good magic uses certain tools and the bad magic uses certain tools, and that people say that if you're using and doing healing spells and potions, then you might use a saucepan, right? They're all nice things. But if you're doing a bad potion or a nasty potion, you'd use a cauldron, right? And they equate black is the sign, the black cauldron is the sign of bad, a nasty, bad, evil, maleficent potion maker, and the saucepan's the sign of a good potion maker. Because that comes from the idea that, well, if I'm doing healing potions, practically, I don't want to do that in the same vessel as I do my poisonous workings and that kind of thing. So they kind of have a clean kit and a dirty kit, a poisonous kit and then a therapeutic healing kit. I'd like to come out and say that I personally think that's bullshit. And I think that what that is that's modern people, modern practitioners, coming out and saying that, oh yes, there is such a thing as good magic and bad magic, but from a practical perspective, we've only ever made those distinctions because obviously you don't want to be getting your kit confused because of chemical constituents in poisons and nasty things you might be using, and that it needs to be white magic, black magic needs to be apart, right? I don't think that's true. I think that people have jumped on the bandwagon of trying to explain something away using practical, reasons that were never really a thing. Because the reason I'm going to say that is because I know people that do white magic that also use poisons. So it's got nothing to do with good and bad. It has to do with toxic and non-toxic. So it's not about toxicity. It's not about good magic versus bad magic. It's about ingredients and being a good chef in the kitchen and making sure that your chopping boards are color coordinated so that you use the red one for the uncooked meat and the black one for the cooked meat, right? That's all it is. It's got nothing to do with good or bad. So iconic tools surrounding good or bad is not really a thing. It's about practical use when it comes to practical tools. As per the magical tools, that I would say stabilizers on a bike. Do you want to disagree with anything I've said, or do you
Not necessarily, more kind of just add further detail, so
okay,
and confirm or deny what you just said. So with the yes, I think to a certain extent it's the likes of Cunningham and other Wiccans that have kind of made more of a thing of this. So this, idea of an athame versus a bolin and all those kind of stuff. Whether or not the handle is white or is black, and they're all wrapped around how energy is directed with those particular tools. And obviously there are, I think, some more recent things that are based on. So you have all these descriptions, because let's face it, most of the books by Scott Cunningham are encyclopedias.
It's not just Scott Cunningham, it's any
No,
book.
any of those, but and to be fair, not gonna lie, a lot of these modern modern Tradwitch books too, the kind of post Keldons, are doing exactly that also, by the fact that what they create are encyclopedias. They try to categorize everything, and the problem with that is that then becomes canon far too quickly, and that's the problem, because these sorts of little snippets are really good for memes and really good for that kind of sound bitey relationship we have with news and information these days. So they very quickly get turned into an infographic that goes on Instagram or TikTok or one of these, and then it's perpetuated by the fact that is really easy to then reshare and repost, and regurgitate when you're trying to explain something that is quite complex, to break it down into something simple. It's kind of the reason that obviously we do an entire hour and only scratch the surface of some of the subjects we talk about. And they are quite small topics, really, the ones that we hit on here. Only need to go and listen to the No Holds Barred podcast and realise quite how vast some of these small seeming subjects get expanded into, and we still don't cover it all. That is you having to re-listen to our podcast 3 or 4 times to have jotted down all the different topics that we've discussed. They all fit within the other topic that we've talked about, which is supposed to be the overarching theme. So, if that's how big and vast a subject some of these things are, how do you expect them to be fitted into a meme or in a Twitter post of 144 characters or whatever it is now? Because I think they went up recently. But there's this kind of like microbyte kind of way in which we consume information that I think perpetuates that. And I know that kind of sounded like I was letting Scott Cunningham off the hook. I'm not. I just think that his information is quite easy to translate into this kind of soundbite culture that unfortunately ruins a lot of subjects. And I think tools is a big one of that, because again, tools are iconography in existence. You see a pencil, you know what the pencil means. You can then apply lots of different things to the pencil in order to make it, it is for writing. It has an eraser. It can remove. It's short and spiky. It can go up your nose. Like it's very quick and easy for you to take an object and to start and breaking that down. And I think that's kind of what happens with a lot of these tools. So the short answer is you don't need any of them. Obviously, again, sticking with Liam's separation of there are utilities that, utensils that you need.
Like my chalice.
So is that, at the end of the day, you stop using it for magical purposes, it still has a use. Those kind of proper utensils, like there are going to be knives that you use. There are going to be those knives that you always use. There are going to be a kind of cooking pots of different kinds of sizes, all that kind of stuff. There are going to be knives, chalices, all those sorts of things. They are vessels or utensils that you need in order to use for the process. But where we say you don't need them is the fact that that gets to the point when you start to do high magics and no longer need any of the earthly connections in order to actually perform witchcraft. And that's where we're talking about manifestation without manifestation or creation without the need for any kind of tools whatsoever. That all you need is strength of will and an understanding, a foundational understanding, as we often call it, in how magic works, where you can pull the energy of the plant without the plant being present. This is what we're talking about when we get to the point where you no longer need the training wheels because you don't need the ingredients. If you don't need the ingredients, you don't need the tools to carry and deal with the ingredients. Does that make sense?
I'm wondering what it would look like if the medical profession did this social media thing, like the witches do. Okay. You know, with rosemary is a substitute for any herb, any herb. I'm wondering if you just have posts like psoriasis, steroid cream, and then what you would get is, ow, this has happened, that's happened. But all of the witches that have shared it, of course, have never had psoriasis. They've never used steroid cream. They don't have a fucking clue. All they're doing is share until one poor unfortunate asshole comes along and puts steroid cream on their asshole.
Yeah.
Because the meme then says, steroid cream, psoriasis skin, steroid cream skin, itchy asshole, steroid cream. That is literally what you're dealing with when it comes to magic on social media and Pinterest and all that sort of thing. That is literally what you're talking about. Someone somewhere has come up with the idea of using an ingredient for something for a valid reason, possibly, maybe for an invalid reason, but then that just gets shared with an equal sign, and that's the problem, is the equal sign, because it takes away from you. Well, it's basically trying to push you to accept it. If you're saying this equals this, you're trying to basically say this, you may as well just take my word for it. I know you don't know me. I know this is a sponsor advert, and I'm trying to sell you a diploma in witchcraft from a centre of excellence. But just know that rosemary equals anything you want.
Yeah, because what it does is it strips the personal gnosis, and that's the problem, is you actually understanding why that operates in that way and why it's being used for that. It's the same reason that, you know, rosemary, according to many, can be used for absolutely anything. The reason for that is everyone has used, because rosemary is such a common herb, that everyone has used it for everything at some point. So when that encyclopedia has been created, because that's how encyclopedias work, they are a collection of information, and therefore there are a whole list of publications in the past, or people in the past that will have used that for different things. All of that information will have been passed down by word of mouth or whatever, and then it finally is deposited into an encyclopedia. And that's why rosemary, for example, has the list of things that it does. Again, things like dragon's blood, you know, might have slightly more specific list of reasons because it's not as common. You know, the common things have the most items on the list. You know, rosemary will exist in every country on the planet in some form. You know, there is a version of sage in every country. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there is that, universally used herbs that are out there that are so common that everyone has got a use for it. You are being about as specific as the common cold. Actually, there's a whole list of viruses and germs that are included in the common cold. We call it the common cold because everybody's had it and will have it regularly. It's not called common for any other reason other than that, because actually what is the current common cold is not last year's common cold, and is not the year before's common cold, but you always call it a common cold because everybody's got it. I don't know
At
if
least
that was
all the
too
common people
cerebral.
have.
So,
Helen uses her cauldron as a plant pot when she's not burning things in it.
yeah.
Just thought you should know that. It's a lovely idea. So here's the question, and it might be a controversial one. It might not be. Who knows? If you've got a student, and we have this concept of magical tools that are stabilizers on a bike that are used to help, what tools would you give a student to help them? And what tools would you just say, nah, don't even bother with that? In other words, what tools are the shake weights and the electrifying devices that everyone knows is bollocks? And what ones could potentially be used to make it easier for someone temporarily? Like crutches when you've broken your leg or something whilst you're recuperating.
Okay.
Difficult.
Difficult because I don't really think any of them are really particularly necessary. I think what's necessary is the advice you gave earlier, which was don't mix the scissors you use for cutting poisonous plants with the ones that you cut bacon to put into your breakfast. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there is that understanding of this tool is not is for magical purposes, but only because it uses something toxic, or you only use it for really bad shit. Because let's face it, if you're doing healing magic, you can pretty much use anything. But obviously, if you, apart from possibly the knife that you tend to use for all your bad shit, that's probably not a good idea. Like, do you know that kind of, like you were saying, raw foods mixing with cooked ones? It is that just mindfulness of the fact that actually, what do I normally use that for? Or do I have a really good cleaning process? Because, it's one of those, I don't really care how many times you bleach my toilet. I'm not going to eat my dinner out of it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there is a set purpose for that. I don't feel the need to mix it. Huh? What was that?
The set purpose for that is for your slave to eat out of.
Yeah.
Like, you don't eat out of a doggy bowl because you're not a doggy.
Exactly. I could, and if there was no other bowl, you could clean the doggy bowl up sparkling enough to eat from it. I'm still, no matter how hungry I am, I'm not going to use the chamber pot. Like, there's a part of me that goes, I don't care how clean it is. I don't think I'm going to eat my dinner off it.
So if any of your students are currently using magical objects, is that because they have chosen to use them, or is it because you've given them something to use?
It'll be because something about the way that they're practicing, it seems that is necessary at that point. So it'd normally be out of that is at the level of understanding they're at. What all of them will be using at the beginner level will be ingredients. That is very different to a tool. And I think this is where some people get on their high horse about it. I wouldn't consider candles, for example, to be a tool. They're an ingredient.
But would
So
you consider some of the people that use the candles to be tools?
most of them.
In what sense of the word, though?
As
In
in
every sense of the word.
every sense of the word.
Presuming that's what you're going to say.
But yeah, I think some people split, like, you know, by saying I don't want you to use tools does not mean you can't go and make a puppet. It doesn't mean you can't go and make a smudge stick or a potion. Like, those are all combinations of ingredients to make a spell happen. Those aren't necessarily tools. But in the same breath, just because you have your favorite pair of scissors that cuts all your poppets doesn't then mean that I'm calling that a tool. I think that, however, I will put an aside to that. If you only use a tool for something specific, don't be surprised when it starts to take on some of that energy. So, if you do have a favorite pair of scissors you like to cut your poppets up, and all your poppets are for fucking people up, don't be surprised that they don't become saturnine based scissors and start to take on other attributes. There is a difference between blessing and creating a magical tool, consecrating something, and actually just using something specific for a specific tool so often that it happens. At the end of the day, this is how these haunted objects and special objects like guillotines, they pass, so much death passes through that blade that you expect that to then be a magical item by the time it's finished its life of being used. This is why people collect items like that, is because so many, like electric chairs. I think there's that wonderful scene from Constantine, is it, back in the early noughties with Keanu Reeves. I think that's the one where he uses the electric chair.
An electric chair, doesn't he? And puts his feet in a foot spa.
Yeah, but essentially the foot spa is not important. What's important is the water and the electric chair. So many souls have passed through it that it makes the perfect portal. Like, those are unintended magical items. Again, not tools.
Which is, with the magical items, is one of those things that people discover. People either discover it themselves, or they learn from someone or a group of people that have discovered it. So using skulls for necromantic work and human bones for necromantic work when you were working with spirits of the dead people, is useful. But that would have been something that's kind of obvious if you think about it logically speaking, when you understand how the energy works and that. But it's also something that if you gave someone a skull, they would be able to tell the difference with using it versus using a plastic one, or you not using one at all, or something like that. It's kind of like, or you get used to it because you feel how much easier it is to use a blender than it is to use a pestle and mortar. And then you have to think about, well, do I use the blender instead of the pestle and mortar? Because traditionally it's been used with the pestle and mortar, and I kind of like the idea of that because it makes me feel like I'm part of the history and that's how it's supposed to be done. And then they generally come to the realization, if they're modern, I'll use the blender first to do all the real work, and then I'll use the pestle and mortar because it makes me look and feel witchy for the last little bit. And that way they can't say I'm not doing it traditionally.
Yeah. And I think
you're not
that's
grinding in the energy like you would be doing it traditionally over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's part of why a lot of people hold on to tools, because when we talk about training wheels, again, it's about that. It's about what if that little besom is what it takes for you to feel witchy enough to make the magic happen, kind of thing, is, if that's what's necessary, then fine. If you like that, then it becomes a bit more of a comfort blanket rather than necessarily a set of training wheels. But it is that kind of thing. Okay, well, I just find it easier when I use that thing. That's fine. At the end of the day, it's your practice. What I'm saying is you don't need them. I think there was a post in Witchcraft Live recently, last week or something, about these kind of witches starter kits, with the first 100 items you need, and it includes a load of herbs, etc., and crystals, and a mini besom, and a book of, an empty book for a book of shadows, and all that kind of shit. And I think a lot of the time it's those kind of Insta-Witch images and their Insta-Witch friend sellers that sell on Etsy these gorgeous sets, because some of them are really pretty, kind of convince people that they need those things. Again, going back to the rosemary example, if it was commonly available to that person, they will have found a way to make that ingredient work for everything. Because why would you go and buy little powders of dragon's blood, which was really hard to get during that time? Why would you go and get myrrh or frankincense or something like that, when actually I can make that same spell work with something that grows in my hedge? That's why a lot of things are done with kind of orris root and dandelion and things like that, where these are weeds. They are so common that actually, why would you need to spend any money to make your spells happen? At the end of the day, these things go back to the cunning man thing. This was a business. If you were selling your wares in order to make that happen, or you were in survival mode, both of those reasons are really good reasons for not spending money.
So is it art then? Do you think that people like the higher level magicians of the ancient world, obviously they would use things, frankincense, stuff like that really does work and it really does add something? Is it necessary? No, but they still use it. Is that art? Is that because they're putting so much that an artist could use the cheap oil paint, or they might go to a fancy art shop and get the proper cool oil paint? The mundane that's looking at the painting ain't going to know the difference, but the artist wants to use certain brands. So is that art, or is that something else?
It's a mixture of things, I guess. The one is it's either fancier for both either the practitioner or the person that's going to be buying the piece. The other option is what a lot of the references people have is for what is essentially ceremonial magics from a religious standpoint, in which case that is sacrifice. So the idea of actually going and finding something more rare means that you're willing to try harder than somebody else to make that happen. But obviously this is kind of more petition based magics I'm talking about there, but if you're using frankincense and myrrh and large quantities of gold in a temple complex, the reason is more likely to be sacrificial than it is to be necessary. There are exceptions, but I'm generalizing. It will be.
Okay. So what approaches do you take then to wean people off of, to take those stablers off of the bike? So if you've got the psychic that uses the tarot cards, how do you help them leave that behind? Or the ceremonial magician that's used to waving the double-edged sword about the place, how do you get them to stop using that? And why, I suppose, as well?
So I think the why is it needs to be something you can do anywhere with anything. So why would you need to have spent 3 weeks preparing, put all the garb on, in order to do a particular kind of protection magic or something? At the end of the day, there are those special things that we do every year, like annual cleanses, things like that, if you're the sort of person that does big cleanses, and those sorts of things, or big solar charges, or recognizing a birthday or a special date. Those sorts of things require a certain level of, this is going back to that kind of piety and ritualistic part. Those are things that you do as a big special thing that you just do every year, that's part of your cycle of the year, or decade, or whatever it is for you. But the idea with your everyday magics is that you shouldn't be reliant on any of those things, because if you are stuck in a pinch and somebody's coming for you, you don't want to think, oh fuck, I need 3 weeks to prepare the right moon cycle phases in order to produce some kind of, you need to be able to pull from whatever is available. I'm on holiday in the Bahamas. Oh, I haven't got that magic stick I had last week, and I always use. Either means you're going to have to travel with that kit all the time, which, let's face it, people that have seen us on the road, like literally, we couldn't carry that case round that has all the small examples of all sorts of herbs and concoctions what known to man. We couldn't carry that around when we decide to go on little holes. Oh, there you go. That is there for a very specific use. That's what it is designed for. You're not going to carry that through customs every time you want to go for a little sunshine break, just in case. You need to be able to access that kind of energy. Nice, it does smell nice. But, you need to be able to access that power wherever you are. And that's the whole point, is you shouldn't be reliant on those things to practice. If Santa Muerte's got it in for you, she's not going to necessarily wait until you've got all your tools on you to have some kind of fair duel. Do you know what I mean? It's going. Let's face it, but bad example. But you know what I mean. You're not going to literally go. She's like, oh well, I'll just wait until you've got your best foot forward, ready to go. There's no.
She might, only so that she could show you how simple it was to defeat you at your best. To be fair, possibly. Knowing her.
Possibly. Like I said, bad example. But my point is, those sorts of things are just going to wait. Those sorts of situations aren't going to wait. You're going to have to deal with that as and when it comes at you, and you need to be prepared for that. In terms of, to answer your other part of your question, because that answers the why, the how is more a case of changing the way in which they do certain things. So, it would often be a case of, okay, I want you to go and do this exercise, but you're not allowed to use any tools. Or you're on a desert island and it's situational, and you're kind of going, okay, what items would you use? So actually getting them more to think about what they would use in a situation where they don't have their kit, more so than saying, you can't use that anymore. It would be, okay, you don't have it. It's not with you. You're on holiday. Now tell me how you're going to get out of this shit. And it can be quite scenario based, in order to get people to do it. And then obviously testing them is also a great option. But often I don't think it's necessary. I think as soon as students start to think about the alternatives, I think they then start to feel less burdened by the tools that they're used to using. It's trickier, however, with psychics. I find they are harder to get off the wagon. They get used to using a particular tool, and particularly when they get really good at it, the better they get at a particular tool, the harder it is to take it off them. What I tend to find is you have to go in through the route of getting them good at several methods before they kind of go, oh, okay, so I don't really need any of these, is what you're telling me. Sometimes with psychics, I find that is often required, that they need to have kind of met a certain level of proficiency with multiple tools before they start to trust that actually it's not the tools doing the work. Because I find too much emphasis is put on how important that first deck is. Or, you know what I mean? Like, they spend all this time finding the perfect deck. They don't really want to let go of it after that. Go on. Are you about to say something rude and entirely inappropriate? Because you're smiling like a fucking Cheshire cat.
I was going to say, let me think of something to say now. I was going to say, ethically speaking, will you prize that tarot deck out of their hands? Will you just say, look, you need to put the cards away if you decide not to? I'm not willing to help, or just keep repeating that? Or would you use higher level magics to break that satellite dish, to break that part of them that can connect with the cards so that they have to use a different approach? Would you ever use one of those things or multiple ones of those things? Can you talk us a little bit about the ethics of mentoring someone through the process?
Yeah, okay. I've never had to. I'm not saying I wouldn't. But then that's just me. And you knew that would be the answer. I don't feel it's often necessary. I think that's really good. So that's very true, Alex.
I'm not entirely sure that is true, Alex. I'd like to see your proof.
Play any single episode of the No Holds Barred or Fausty Witches. I think there is hours of evidence
Play
to support
any of those
that.
and utilize them in any way in order to prove me wrong, and there'll be a copyright issue.
So yeah, I wouldn't rule them out. I'd really have to care, though, I think is the second part of it.
Okay, so you'd have to be overly invested.
I'd have to be overly invested to take that kind of route. No.
Okay.
As in, overly invested has happened, but
Right.
not having to do it in that way. Mainly because if someone's that reliant on those sorts of methods, I'll have probably got bored before I've decided to kind of sever their links. Long before. I'm not saying I wouldn't introduce someone to a deity that might do that anyway.
Oh, I see. So this because you're not doing the work, they don't count. But let's be fair. If you know that the deity is going to turn around and say that, I think, are you not guilty by association?
Nah.
Of doing that very same thing?
My hands are clean,
like helping someone to murder.
My hands are clean.
Right, because they're not so clean, though, are they? If you're doing that, really, you're a you are culpable.
Nah.
I'd like to use this then, because to explore another concept that we haven't necessarily talked about, I don't think, but I think is kind of linked now we've talked a little bit about that. And that's the idea of, obviously, it is difficult, much like it's difficult for alcoholics to give up alcohol and drug users to give up drugs. It can be really difficult for some people to give up magical tools and learn the ability without. Now, what is it that makes, and how do you distinguish between a bad student and a bad teacher? Because there's this concept that there's no such thing as a bad student, there's only such a thing as a bad teacher. And the idea that if you're not learning is because you've got the wrong teacher. So when it comes to this process and guiding people through this process, because I know it's painful, because you're giving something up, it is essentially like rehabilitation, you know.
Yeah.
How do you know that you are doing it for the betterment of the person, and how do you reassure them of that?
Okay. I think when it comes to magical issues, I will say that actually I do think there are such thing as bad students. But I find that actually the bad part of it is normally the timing, where students want something to happen at a time where it's just not possible for them. And it's not out of their lack of trying and being bad in that way, but as in when they won't actually go and deal with the things in their life they need to deal with first. And I don't think any amount of good teaching is going to fix something being in a bad time for a student to learn. I don't feel like there's any answer for that. You can be as supportive as possible, but actually it's not the skill of the teacher that is the problem there. It's the timing. So you could argue that it's neither of their faults, I guess. But you know me, I like to put the blame at somebody's feet. So mine would, in that situation, because the good teacher will just keep going and they'll keep restepping that same bit. And there's nothing to do about that other than wait for that timing to kind of catch up. But I find that actually for some students that's, you know, because a good teacher's not going to give up, and a good teacher's not going to turn around and say, this is a bad time for you, you know, fuck off and come back in a few months' time. I might do. But a good teacher is going to turn around and say, this is only going to get harder until you go and deal with some other shit. But the bad student will just go, you know, it's just not good enough, and find another teacher and another teacher. Because that's what bad students tend to do, is just kind of keep going, cycling through teachers until they realize, oh, okay, they're all trying to teach me the same way and I'm not getting it. It then starts to be a bit more of a thing.
But what if all of the teachers you've approached have all read Scott Cunningham and all say the same thing because they come from the same school of thought, which is 80s, 90s, and noughties Wiccan?
I didn't say there is no such thing as a bad teacher. What I was trying to say was I disagree with the idea that there is no such thing as a bad student. That was all I was trying to comment there. There are lots of bad teachers. I'm not saying that at all. I think that just often students don't consider the possibility that actually maybe they're a bad student, because we're all, as a society keeps telling you, there are no bad students, only bad teachers. Therefore, the assumption of blame.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, if you're going to focus on those two customs that we have as humanity, then I guess there's always going to be. What was the main part of that question? Because I answered that rather than actually what you asked.
No, it pretty much is. It pretty much answers that. I think it covers it in there. Alex is saying something. You could always ask a spirit help. You arrange your life in such a fashion that you're in better position to be able to learn. Yeah,
It is,
so
but what are you going to pay
preparing
for that?
students to learn is all in the prep work. The magic is in the prep work, all of that sort of thing. Prep work makes it easy, like painting and decorating, or Gordon Ramsay's cook along. If you've got all those ingredients chopped up, when he's throwing it all in and saying a load of stuff and effing and jeffing, then it's easier to actually get a meal out of it than it is to try and do it as they're doing it. It was in the prep work. It's all about the preparation. Preparation prevents piss poor performance, as I was told at college. So one other thing then. If you've got someone that is on a path, say they're learning tarot or runes, or they're utilizing and getting obsessed with a magical tool in order to make the magic happen, essentially. And then you've got a new person that's never really done anything before. How do those two people compare? So will the person that uses that tool progress quicker than the person that doesn't use the tool but has less experience on average? Or will it be that the student who, because I have an idea that the student normally who doesn't get into a bad habit from day one tends to progress more evenly, because it is slow progression, but it's even progression. Whereas I think a lot of people with bad habits or have massive mountains to climb because they've learnt wrong, very often is kind of, they spend most of their time worrying and moaning about having to go up the mountain before they even start climbing. Whereas the beginner, I don't see that does that, because they don't know what a mountain is, you know. So I'm just wondering about comparing and contrasting people with bad habits, particularly surrounding tools, and ones that are essentially virgins, and whether you see a difference there.
I suppose the first kind of distinction I'll make is really depends on what you're asking. So if you're wanting who learns more evenly, then yes, someone from a fresh start will always learn more evenly. It really depends on what they've been. Who learns it easier? I think really depends. Because you're always going to have to work against someone's bad habits or bad teachings when you have somebody that's been learning for a while. I find the hardest part that actually applies to both groups is ego. So are they willing to actually listen and not, try and constantly prove how much they think they know? Because I think that's where I struggle most. I personally just want to see a result. So I don't need you to tell me you understand. I need you to actually show me a result. When you've got the result, and I think this has become more and more apparent with my current job, is my day job, is that working with students with additional needs means I don't need them to tell me, and they don't necessarily. Then most of them aren't capable of telling me. What they can do is show me a result and complete something in a particular way. And I think the more that I work with it, the more I'm thinking, actually, that's what I want. I don't need you to explain or prove your knowledge by giving me a load of shit, like going on and on and on. What I need you to do is actually just fucking do what you said you were going to do or what you've agreed to do. That's how it's going to be.
You sound like a math teacher, apparently.
A math teacher.
Okay, so the ego thing's interesting, because I found that there are a couple of things that stop people, or some obstacles that people get stuck on. And there's two big ones, and they're kind of they're opposites of each other. So ego's one, but ego's a positive and a negative. But then fear is also one, because the person with the ego thinks and knows and assumes that they can do it. But they are also more than likely going to be knocked on their ass because they might get it wrong. But at least they make a start. And they have the confidence to go for it. Whereas the fearful, the problem with them is that they never start in the first place. So although they don't get into fights they can't handle, they don't get into any fights. They don't get into anything, you know. So there is often two types of students there. You've got ones that are knocked back constantly because their ego's too big and they bite off more than they can chew constantly. And then there's the ones that don't bite off enough.
Yeah.
And it's that happy kind of middle ground that I think makes for a good student.
Yeah, somewhere between the two. They need to be confident enough to be able to forge forward, but fearful enough to take everything at a steady pace. I must say, if I'm going to have one of the two wrong uns, should we say, I would rather have the one that's too bullshit.
I'd rather have the one with the ego, definitely.
I'd rather have someone with an ego.
Better with the one with the ego than I would with the wet wipe, if I'm honest.
Yeah. So, because I think in some ways it's easier to kind of beat an ego into shape, into productive shape,
like army training.
Yeah, than it is to necessarily constantly reassure and support someone that is just a scaredy cat, because you know, at that point I'm of the feeling of, why are you on this path in the first place? A lot of the time, and I think that's a big part of it. So it really does depend. Go on.
So out of all of the students you have then, which one's got the biggest ego and which one's the scaredy cat, the biggest scaredy cat?
You know I'm not going to answer that at all.
Of course, name names, Chris. Name names.
No, I'm not answering that one. No.
Oh, damn.
Would you answer that one?
We've gone on to the next thing now because Julie's asked something.
Convenient.
Or she might have said something. Reminds me of some stuff some of my Overwatch coaches have said. Is easier to teach someone to be less aggressive in their play the more aggressive. Okay.
Yeah.
And Alex thinks it's a loaded question.
Liam only knows how to make loaded questions. That's his job. Yeah, I think it comes down to finding. I think most students are great if they can actually just, you know, if they can kind of accept that there's more to learn, and go from there. And I think as teachers, it's the same. I think you get to a point in your path, I guess, where you almost need to become a teacher, even if it's just for a little while, where you suddenly reminded of what it's like to be a student, and therefore learn to ask the questions differently or explain things differently. And I think, you know, teaching really can make you so much better. I think we've had some of our patrons recently who've had their first kind of forays into, you know, having conversations and being the kind of more knowledgeable amongst their kind of witchy friends. And they're already kind of explaining something to somebody else is the best way to kind of guarantee you understand it. is when you're asked to explain. So you know, I think. Go on. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say we are over an hour now, so we've got to leave it there. So tune in next week for next week's Fausty Witches Q&A. What it'll be about, I don't know. You'd better get those magical tools out, only to put them back down again and not use them for your psychic spying for next week's episode. See what I did there? Told them to get their magical tools that they would use to look at what's going on next week and then not use them and put them away and instead use Wandless Magic.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.